I'll give you guys the login.
And my 7 o'clock one, I had a feeling they were going to talk about the Super Bowl last night.
How to mute
And
people.
Christy may want to mute.
I don't know at home.
Mute everybody.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
None of that mean thing. It's just like if someone looked you up as an attorney.
Yeah, you gotta mute yourself.
Yeah, he is a sole petitioner. I called someone last night. Oh, even
Great. Everybody's muted, and now I just unmuted myself.
Okay, perfect. And I just asked Fred to unmute himself too.
Great. So Fred, you've taught these classes before.
I like to stay muted, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you'll just see my style. You'll see how I've taught them many times before as well, just not to this group.
So we should be recording and we are good to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I think we will get started. Is it 9 o'clock yet?
It's 9 a.m.
9 a.m. straight up. We'll give a couple minutes just to let everybody get on board here. But welcome to those of you who are already here. This is going to be a great class. I'll try not to make it boring because as you know, contracts can get that way. But I think you'll be very pleased. So we'll just wait a couple minutes and then we'll take a break about an hour in.
And I have 9:05.
Okay, good. Well, I think we'll get started, everybody, just out of respect for those of us who are on the call on time. So in this contracts class, I really encourage you to read the contracts for yourself. They've all been available to you. And I'm going to give you a lot of the things that you need to know in order to tell a client how to feel comfortable in signing this form, and hopefully give you some highlights of the forms so you can explain them to them. So the first form that we have is the Coronavirus Property Entry Advisory and Declaration, or the PEAD-V. So the PEAD is required for anybody going into any property at any time. And it includes an inspector, it includes an appraiser, it includes anyone that goes into the property. So you obviously have to put the property address at the top. And then I always explain to the client why they're signing the form. So just so you don't have to read every single line to them, the purpose of entry of the form is for either viewing the property or inspecting the property. And that's the most important thing that you need to tell them. You also need to tell them that they are required to take all reasonable steps necessary to protect yourself and others. And that's really what the form is about. It's because we're in a pandemic, because we have protocols that we have to follow, this form will help you along the way to protecting your client. Number 5 says property entrance rules. The signer is voluntarily entering the property. The signer agrees to take all reasonable and necessary precautions to protect the signer and others from the spread of the coronavirus, including but not limited to the following posted rules of entry. So you know, when you go to a listing, there should be a sign on the front door giving all the protocols. There should be wipes, masks, hand sanitizer, everything you need in order to prepare that client if they've not brought what they need. If they don't have a mask on when you go into somebody's property, they're not allowed to go in. It's just that simple. You need to wash your hands or sanitize your hands as soon as you go into the property before you go walking around in somebody's property. You always must wear a face mask. I know I've had situations where they only want to put a face mask on at the front door. Well, if you don't want to put the face mask on during the whole thing, you're not allowed to come in the property. And that person happened to drive up from Los Angeles and really gave me a hard time about, I'm not going to wear a mask. Well, you don't wear a mask, you don't go into the property. It is required. Also, practice social distancing, keeping at least 6 feet apart between you and others. That is very, very important when you're showing a piece of property. You need to go in first and then have that client follow you, but you need to stay 6 feet apart from them as well. Avoid touching any knobs, faucets, toilets, handles, anything. If you do touch a surface, then it must be wiped down. And the agent that is showing the property must do that. So all of this is in this form, and I always just do the highlights of this form so they're not having to read every single line. Number 6, signer acknowledges and authorizations. There's no written materials or brochures describing advertising, marketing at the property. If you need to give them the information, you need to have given it to them prior to going into the property, because brochures and paper are not going to be available at the property because it's said that coronavirus sticks to paper. Mandatory government showing requirements, the best way to show a piece of property. Seller acknowledges that all the others have been advised to clean and disinfect the property before and after each showing. So I always have the seller make sure that they have disinfected the property prior to me coming into their house. And then I always let them know that it needs to be done again after we leave, just as a precaution. Signers and presentations. It may be dangerous and unsafe for all of us to go into that property. We need to make sure that we are asking the questions. Are you free of COVID? Have you felt sick in the last 24 hours? Is there anyone in the house that has been sick? Those are all questions that need to be asked. And then in the form, it says, to the best of your knowledge, are you not currently affected with COVID-19? And number F says, you will inform the broker after the date this document is signed if there's a change in your health condition or knowledge that potentially puts others at risk or validates the representation made on this document. Those are very, very important things. I always make sure I do a log of keeping the date, the time, who came into the property, and make sure my form matches that log, so that if someone comes back to me and says, I've been infected with COVID because you showed me this property, you have the form signed, you've explained it, and they know what the risks are and are accepting those risks of going into the property. Number 10 says agreement, declaration, and assumption of risk. We can't guarantee that you will not be exposed to COVID-19. And I say those words. I say exactly that. You could get COVID by walking into this house. You need to know that that is your risk. And then you just need to make sure that everyone signs who is there. If you need more than one, just remember you're only allowed to bring yourself and 2 other people into the property. And if there's more than that, then you need to do 2 showings with 2 forms. And then everybody needs to sign that form, and then it needs to be acknowledged at the bottom. Then you need to send that form to the listing agent prior to going in so that the listing agent has that as well. The next form, well, let me just check and see. There's no questions. So the next form is mandatory government showing requirements, including best practices, guidelines, and prevention plan. This is basically a disclosure to the clients saying how the showing is going to go. Things that I highlight on this form is number 4. Only one listing agent and 1 buying party are to be in the dwelling at the same time during the showing. Show houses with occupants not present when possible. That means the seller. Agents conducting the showing should meet clients at the property and not drive the clients to the property. So it basically gives the rules of how you're going to show the property, and everybody takes a little responsibility for that. All the information must be delivered electronically. You will not be able to give any promotional materials to that buyer at the property. And then you're not allowed to stay in the driveway and talk about it. You actually have to get in your cars and go somewhere else, not stay in front of that property in order to talk about it. Page 2 says the agent who shows the property shall follow the cleaning and disinfecting protocols and provide sanitation products unless otherwise agreed. That's really important to make sure that if there's not any sanitizing things at the property, that you have them in your car, that you can go back and pick them up and make sure that that client is protected. Number 3, shown properties should have commonly used surface areas cleaned and disinfected before and after each showing. That gets reiterated. That includes if somebody has to go to the bathroom. I do not let buyers go to the bathroom at a property right now, because you have to clean that property, clean that bathroom after that's happened. So I always make sure they've gone before so that they don't have any reason to use the bathroom at all. Number 4, no showings may occur unless the property is clean and disinfected before and after. So how do we know that that's happened? I usually have a text or an email from the listing agent that the seller has done that prior to, or the listing agent has done that prior to. Just to cover myself, it's always a great idea. Rules for every visitor prior to entering the property must have signed the coronavirus property entered advisory and declaration, which is the PEAD form that we just covered, and a delivered copy to the signed form to the listing agent. And there's lots of ways now that we can do that that makes it easier. If for some reason you haven't done that prior to, you haven't met that client, then you can take the PEAD form with you, have them signed at the front door prior to going in, and then just simply take a picture of it and send it to the listing agent. But the listing agent must have that. Again, that's just a disclosure. Any questions on that so far? Because those are very important forms for our environment right now.
On the other Zoom.
No, I sent
Questions
them.
right now?
They're not there.
Right, seeing none, we'll move on.
There's like 5 girls there, and I'm trying to tell you that I don't know what
Kristen.
Zoom you are.
Hang on one second. We're having some Zoom difficulties. There's people that are not in our Zoom, and I'm not
Send me
quite
the
sure.
link again, 'cause I'm sending in, and it's the one I.
Hang on one second.
What Zoom are they in?
They're trying to sign on, Chris, or what's the problem?
They're on a different Zoom link,
Oh, got it.
so I don't know what was sent.
Well, someone just sent out a new Zoom link.
Oh, they did?
Hey, Fred, can you do me a favor? Can you send Millie our Zoom link that we're on, please?
I will get that right now.
Sorry, guys, be patient for us a little bit.
What's
Just gonna-
Millie's last name?
Chocano, Chocano. I'm going to mute myself just for a second. What do you guys see? Do you see the,
You still see the second coronavirus
Yeah.
form
Okay.
on the screen.
okay, so
You
let's,
can go to agency now.
Yeah, we got a few more people just bumped on, so I guess,
Are we good, Fred?
I think we are, but
Okay, good. All right, we'll continue. So the agency disclosure form is your most important form in your transaction. It states how you have, what your agreement is with the buyer and seller. Okay, good. I'm just reading the chat at the same time. So that is your CA form AD, and it is required to every real estate transaction file. So the agency disclosure form simply states what the seller's agent is required to do. The seller's agent under the listing agreement with the seller acts as an agent for the seller only. And the seller's agent is a sub-agent of the agent that has the following affirmation obligations. The seller To the seller, a fiduciary duty is utmost care, integrity, honesty, and loyalty in dealings with the seller. To the buyer and the seller, diligent exercise and reasonable skill and care in performance of agent's duties. I think it's really important that you have a standard level of care that you provide to every single client, so that if at any time somebody says you didn't do something a particular way, you can say, no sir, no ma'am, I do this every single time the same way. And that is doing all of the forms that are required, but also in the order of which they need to be done. So this agency form needs to be filled out prior to you writing a contract, whether it's a listing contract or an RPA for the buyer. So you have a fiduciary to the seller when you are the seller's agent, which means that you are looking out for their best interest. A duty of honest and fair dealings and good faith. A duty to disclose all known to the agent material facts affecting the value and desirability of the property that are not known or within the diligent attention and observation of the parties. An agent is not obligated to reveal to either party any confidential information obtained from either party and that does not involve the affirmative duties set forth above. So basically, you can act on behalf because you have a fiduciary duty to that seller. If for some reason that seller is unable to do something that you need done, technically you can do that and then have them sign to confirm that you've done the right thing for them. Same with the buyer's agent. A buyer's agent can, with the buyer's consent, agree to act as an agent for the buyer only. In these situations, the agent is not the seller's agent, even if by agreement the agent may receive compensation for services rendered either in full or in part from the seller. An agent acting only for a buyer has the following affirmative obligations: using due diligence, exercise of reasonable skill and care in performance in the agent's duties, a duty of honesty and fair dealing in good faith, and a duty to disclose all material facts affecting the value or desirability of the property that are not known to or within the diligent attention of observation of the parties. So when you're working for the buyer, you're simply doing that. Even if there's a situation where there's dual agency, you need to make sure that if you've signed, let me just back up a little bit. If you've signed a seller agent with a listing agreement and you happen to sign a buyer up and you have an accepted offer, that is considered dual agency, and you would need to have another agency form signed. I always circle dual agency, agent representing both seller and buyer in a transaction, so it's clear that the broker is representing all parties in the transaction. So if you have signed a seller's agreement or a buyer's agreement with agency, you then need to do another one if you happen to represent everybody in the transaction. So agent representing both seller and buyer, a real estate agent acting directly through one or more salespersons or broker associates can legally be the agent of both the buyer and seller in the transaction, but only with the knowledge and consent of the buyer and seller. So that's the most important part of dual agency, is disclosure, letting them both know how that's going to work. So seller and buyer responsibilities: either the purchase agreement or a separate document will contain the confirmation of the agent representing you and whether the agent is representing you exclusively in the transaction or acting as dual agent. Now you guys all know that buyer and sellers really don't read unless you are the one reading to them. There's many buyers and sellers that I have represented in the past that would just sign the form. And they hope that you know exactly what's going on with the transaction and that you know what your responsibility is to them, and everything's good until it isn't. So highly important that you know how to reiterate this form to a buyer, to a seller, and then most importantly, when you are a dual agent representing all parties in the transaction. Once they sign the bottom of the form, they are acknowledging that they have read the information, and then you sign at the bottom as well as the agent with your license number and the company's license number. We have one. Oh, I was just checking the chat box just to make sure.
Yeah, I've got it covered, Karen, don't worry.
Okay, good. Thanks, hon. I appreciate that. We're going to move on to the next form, which is Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. This form simply says you may not discriminate in any way, shape, or form, and it spells it out specifically with all the different Civil Rights Acts, the Disability Act, the Employment and Housing Act. Need to make sure that they understand what discrimination is and why it's so important that it doesn't happen, and that you're doing fair housing practices. This form will specifically tell the buyer and the seller exactly what that is. Examples of conduct that may not be motivated by discrimination intent but could have discrimination effects. Prior to acceptance of the offer, asking for an offering buyer personal information or letters from the buyer, especially with photos. Those types of documents may be inadvertently revealed or perceived or revealing. Protected status information hereby increasing the risk of actual or unconscious bias. Potential legal claims against the sellers or other prospective buyers whose offers were rejected. So you just need to make sure that you've explained this form in detail. I don't spend a lot of time on this form. It's pretty self-explanatory. I read them exactly what I want them to know. And then at the bottom of the second page, you have them sign that. It also gives you all of the Fair Housing's number 11, gives you the Fair Housing resources of where they can find information on the Fair Housing Acts. And that's about all that I go over. You make sure you get that signed, and that is required for your file. Next form, possible representation of more than one buyer and seller, disclosure and consent. This is required to every transaction. And one thing I do have to say is all of these forms are based on a lawsuit that's happened in the past. So when you have a buyer and seller sign that you have possible representation of more than one buyer and seller, they know that they're not your only client and that you could be representing somebody else in the transaction or a different transaction. So multiple buyers, most important. Broker individually or through its associate licensees may be working with many prospective buyers at the same time. I highlight that. I know a lot of people do highlight that. These prospective buyers may have an interest in and making offers on the same properties. I always make sure that that buyer knows that I could be writing an offer on the same property that I'm writing an offer for them. I typically will tell them that just so that they know that there's more than one buyer and seller. Broker will not be limited to or restricted to any particular buyer from making an offer on any particular property, whether or not the broker represents other buyers interested in the same property. Multiple sellers. Broker may have listings on many properties at the same time. Well, we all hope we do have many listings at one time. As a result, the broker will attempt to find buyers for each of those listed properties. Some listed properties may appeal to the same prospective buyers. Some properties may attract more prospective buyers than others. Some of these prospective buyers may be represented by a broker in and some may not. Broker may market all listed properties to all prospective buyers, whether or not the broker has another or listed properties that may appeal to the same prospective buyers. Again, in reading these forms and picking out what you want that client to know is very important. It goes again to dual agency and explains that again. It gets reiterated over and over. At the bottom, it says offers are not necessarily confidential. A lot of buyers and sellers think they are. They also think that they cannot discuss that or let the buyer know that there's 5 offers, they're all over full price. If you have permission from your seller to disclose that to a buyer, you may do that. So a buyer is advised that seller or listing agent may disclose the existence, terms, or conditions of a buyer's offer unless all parties and their agents have signed a written confidential agreement. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as a current market condition, the prevailing practices in a real estate community, the listing agent's marketing strategy, and the instructions of the seller. And then you have them sign at the bottom. Usually there's questions on this form. Like, I thought you were my only client. You just need to spend some time on this form and make sure that both your buyer and sellers know that you have many clients, and this is the reason why this form exists, because a long time ago, I can't remember what year, but a long time ago, there was a lawsuit, a big lawsuit, where somebody thought they were the only clients of that agent and found out later that they were not, and that's why this form exists. You sign the bottom, seller and buyer, and then you sign and the seller's agent also signs. So everybody signs this form so that everybody is clear. The next form is Wire Fraud and Electronics Funds Transfer Advisory, the WFA. I reiterate this over and over and over. I have very close to been in a transaction where funds were wired to a different company than where they were supposed to go, and we barely got that money back. So I reiterate this as many times as possible. I talk about it all through the transaction. Wire fraud is real, and wire fraud does happen. So this form specifically gives the buyer and seller both the information that they need to be aware of wire fraud. So wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. The ability to communicate and conduct business electronically is a convenience and a reality in nearly all parts of our lives. At the same time, it provides hackers and scammers the new opportunities for their criminal activity. Many businesses have been victimized, and the real estate business is no exception. I read that to them because I want them to know that. The other part that I read is number 2, which is do not ever wire or electronically transfer funds prior to calling your confirm the transfer of instructions. I call that hand walking the wire. And when you hand walk the wire, you give the wiring instructions from the title company to your client, make sure that they have them with them. They go to the bank, they wire their money. The bank officer calls the escrow company. The escrow company will confirm the wire, and the client will get a receipt from that bank officer saying that that wire has happened and when the wire is going to be confirmed. And then you just make sure that the escrow company actually gets the confirmation of the wire by either the end of the day or by 10 o'clock the next day. So you want to orally confirm the transfer instruction is legitimate and confirm the bank routing number, account number, and all other codes before taking steps to transfer the funds. I know I have clients that will not wire money because they're just so afraid of wire fraud. It's the safest way to send money in a real estate transaction is by wire. And most escrow companies want you to do that. But you need to make sure that you're having a conversation with all of your clients regarding wire fraud. The form needs to be signed at the bottom by both buyer and seller, and it needs to be in your file. It is required for your transaction. Okay, we got through the little forms. Now we're on to the real estate purchase agreement. This purchase agreement you can write any transaction on it if you don't have like a mobile home, or you don't have a land contract, or you don't have an income property contract. Do we want you to write them on those? Yes, the specific forms make it a lot easier for you to do that, but you can write in and basically sell any property on this real estate purchase agreement. This is a residential purchase agreement. It's for residential property only, property under 4 units. And we're going to get right into it. So the date prepared, above number 1, the date prepared is very important to put on the form. This is an offer from buyer 1 or buyer 2. You need to spell out their name, and I always make sure when I'm putting their name on a contract that I'm looking at a driver's license to make sure that I've got a middle name or a middle initial that goes right along with that. Because when they get their grant deed and or their loan documents, they are going to have to show ID, and you want that contract and that ID to match. So that's why I always look at their driver's license just to be sure. The real property is being acquired at 1234 Hope Street, Westlake Village. You want to put the address there, the city that it's in, Westlake Village, the county of which it's in, which is Ventura, and the zip code. A lot of times I will put plus the 4 at the end of the zip code. So just know that there's enough room to put a dash and the 4 other digits of a zip code so that it's complete. The assessor's parcel number is very important to put in this contract. It is found, you will find that assessor's parcel number in several different places. You'll find it in the multiple listing service because it's required for our MLS to have that number in there, or you will find it on the tax rolls. So if you've done your homework on the property prior to making an offer, you will have all the information you need on the seller so that you can fill this form out. The assessor's parcel number is on the tax rolls when you pull the tax rolls of the property that you're going to be writing the offer on. The purchase price is offered is, and you spell it out like a check. So you didn't put a price, so I'll just make it up, $500,000. So you would spell out $500,000, and then at the dollars sign, you will type in $500,000. The close of escrow shall occur on, you can either put a date, usually at the end of the month, or if somebody is got a specific date that they have to move by and close by, you can put that date in there, or you can put 30 or 45 days, 60 days after acceptance. But you have to put a date in there, either a time frame or a date. Most important, your escrow officer is going to make sure that happens as well.
Oops.
Buyer and seller are referred to as parties. Brokers are not parties to this agreement. So the buyer and seller is the seller selling the property, the buyer is buying the property. Buyer are disclosures. The parties each acknowledge receipt of the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationships. That's your agency form that we just went over. It reiterates it in here in case for some reason you didn't have the form, you need to reiterate it again. So when you pull your multiple listing service, the data sheet on the property that you're writing an offer on, it will tell you who the seller broker is. You need to write the name of that brokerage on number B where it says seller broker firm. So either Remax, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Everest, whoever that selling broker is, you need to put that name there. And then also the license number of that brokerage needs to go in the next line. Is the broker check one representing the seller or both the buyer and the seller? Most of the time it is representing the seller. The agent is representing the seller who has the listing, unless they're writing an offer for the buyer on their own listing, and then you become representing both the buyer and seller, and you will check that. The seller's agent is you. So if you're writing the offer, you're representing, seller's agent is Century 21 Everest. Why has that twice? Oh, in case if there's two agents that are on the listing agreement, then you would put the other agent there. And then go down to the buyer's broker firm, Century 21 Everest. You will be writing the contract, so you are representing the buyer. And if you have the listing, you would be writing both the buyer and seller. You would be dual agent. And then the buyer's name, which is you, and then your license number. Potential competing buyers and sellers, the parties each acknowledge receipt of the representation of more than one buyer and seller. So it just reiterates it again. You just need to check that box and then make sure that that form is included in your contract when you send it over to the listing agent. So let me just state here, when you put something in this purchase agreement, everybody needs a copy of it. So whatever it is, whether it's a disclosure, whether it's an addendum, whether it's something that's already checked in the contract, you need to make sure that that form is actually going to all parties as well, besides the listing contract. Or sorry, the purchase contract. Financing terms, buyer represents that the funds will be good when deposited into escrow. Most escrow companies want you to wire that earnest money deposit, and you put that amount right at the initial deposit. So the deposit shall be in the amount of, usually it's 3% of the sales price, and that's where that amount goes, and it's usually wired. You can use a cashier's check, although they don't like you to. They'll probably tell you no in today's market. I can't remember the last time anybody's written a personal check for it, but you can write a personal check. And it needs to be in escrow within 3 business days. Increased deposit. An increased deposit can be given. So let's just say that you have to transfer funds in order to put your deposit in escrow. You can say 0 for initial deposit and increase that deposit by the 3% as an example. If it's an all cash offer, you need to check the box. It's an all cash offer. There's no loan needed to purchase the property. It is not contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan. In other words, the buyer cannot back out of the contract by getting a loan if they check that all cash offer. So loans, the first loan in the amount of, your lender's going to tell you how much that buyer qualifies for and what their loan amount will be. And then you need to specifically state whether it's an FHA loan, a VA loan, or whether it is conventional with adjustable rate mortgage, or if it's a fixed mortgage. And you need to put the interest rate that it will not exceed. So right now interest rates are 2.75. So not in this contract, you would probably put 3 to 3.5% so that your buyer cannot use that as a reason to get out of the contract. In past markets, I have seen interest rates go up 3% in one day. So it's very important to make sure that you put a percentage that this will not exceed, because your client usually will not qualify if the market changed that drastically, and they need to be able to walk away from the transaction for that reason. So you always want to put an amount of which it's not going to exceed in the contract. You also want to make sure that if your buyer is only paying 1% or 0.5% for the cost of that loan, that you put the number of points that is in the contract. And then I always put 1% higher just so that they have some flexibility. Or at the bottom where it says E, additional financing terms, you can say that the buyer will get best prevailing rate, and whatever it is at the time that they close the loan is what they're going to get. So they don't have a way to get out of the contract. You need to button that up a little bit. And then at the bottom, you're going to put the balance of the down payment on the next line. And then the total purchase price is $500,000. You need to make sure that the buyer initials at the bottom of every page of the contract. Page 2, verification of down payment and closing costs. Buyer or buyer's lender or loan broker pursuant to paragraph 3J shall within 3 days of acceptance deliver to seller written verification of buyer's down payment and closing costs. Well, we all know in this market, you cannot write an offer without having already done that, verified the closing costs, the down payment, their loan amount, everything with a lender prior to writing an offer. It just, you don't have that flexibility in this market. Appraisal contingency and removal. This agreement is or is not contingent upon written appraisal of the property by a licensed certified appraiser at no less than the purchase price. In this market, to be honest, people are removing appraisal contingencies. In a regular market where you've got more inventory, you would never remove an appraisal contingency until the appraisal's been done and completed. So that's the difference in what a prior market to this market is. In this market, you're probably going to remove that contingency because you're not going to be able to compete with other offers if you don't. The remove the appraisal contingency or cancel agreement within 17 days. A lot of times it takes 21 days or so, especially in this market with COVID. I always change mine to 21 days. That's a long time in a 30 days or 45-day escrow, but it's just reality in this market. If you are going to have the appraisal done, you need to give time for that to happen. Loan terms, loan applications, it should already be done. It says within 3 calendar days of acceptance. You should not be writing this offer if you do not have loan approval for your buyer. You just can't compete in this market. Loan contingency, buyers shall act diligently and in good faith to obtain the designated loans. Again, that needs to happen already. You should already have everything in place except for the appraisal and the title and things like that for your contingencies. Loan contingency removal. Within 21 days after acceptance, buyers shall, as specific in paragraph 14, in writing remove the loan contingency or cancel this agreement. So your loan contingency removal means that the appraisal has been done, that the loan is approved, and you have a commitment to lend from that lender. If you don't have that, you don't want to remove the contingency of the loan until it is funded. And that's just how I do my business. In this market, you don't have that luxury. You don't have the luxury of not removing the loan contingency. It will be removed in 21 days or less. And a lot of times you have everything in place so that you can remove it as soon as possible. Number 4 says no loan contingency. Obtaining a loan specific is not a contingency of this agreement. That means that they'll get the loan no matter what. It's not a way for them to back out of the transaction. If they check that box, they're removing the loan contingency completely. Lender limits on buyer's credits.
Karen, we have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Andy would like to know if we remove the appraisal contingency, can the buyer still get the loan if it doesn't appraise?
Yes, the buyer can still get the loan. If it doesn't appraise, they have to pay the difference. So just know if you remove that appraisal contingency and it does say it, we're at 500,000 and it appraises for 490, the seller is not going to let you off the hook of buying that property. The buyer is going to have to come up with that $10,000 more. So you've got to be very careful in that situation to make sure that you have enough down payment, that you'll still be able to qualify for the loan and pay the difference of that appraisal.
Also,
So
on a
the
side note,
down payment amount can be included in the amount that's not in the appraisal?
I'm sorry, the down payment, tell me
So
again.
let's say somebody's putting, it's a $500,000 property and they're putting 100,000 down, and it only appraises for 450. Are they still in good shape because they're putting 100,000 down?
If the lender is going to lend them and not using the full 100,000 that they're putting down,
If the
So
if the lender's loaning 400,000 and it appraises
you
for
would still be-
450.
yes, you'd still be able to do that.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
also one note on that too, is if you remove the appraisal contingency and you can't get the loan because of an appraisal, you don't have any contingency, so you may lose your earnest money deposit.
That's very correct.
Yeah, there used to be, the appraisal game used to be played in the past where they'd remove the appraisal, they couldn't get the loan, and they go, oh, well, sorry, can't get the loan. And it's actually spelled out in the contract that that doesn't work anymore.
Okay,
That's
thanks.
the guarantee for the seller to make sure that your contingencies are all removed so that they can move on and buying another property some other place.
Fred,
Yeah,
can you
right.
say what you said again, please?
Fred?
Oh, sure. If you remove the appraisal contingency and then they can't get the loan because it doesn't appraise and they don't want to come up with the difference, you don't have a contingency to cancel the contract. Also,
But if it,
okay.
sorry,
Okay.
Go
but
ahead.
if they're already putting up the difference in the down payment, it doesn't really matter.
Correct. If they can make up the difference, you know, lower down payment and put more towards the difference, yes, that works. Another thing that happened is we had a deal that the lender said, you know, because they're putting a lot of money down, we're going to waive the appraisal. So the appraisal was waived. However, the lender still did an appraisal because they want to make sure what the value of the property is. And the appraisal called out some items. At that point now, we really have no contingency because we waived the appraisal, but you can't get the loan unless these items are fixed. So we had to do some negotiation to make that happen. So just be careful when you waive the appraisal to get your loan approved.
And another tip on that too is if you remove the appraisal and there are repairs that have been called out on that appraisal, it must be done prior to close of escrow. So now the seller has to agree to do those repairs and or the buyer has to agree to do those repairs with no guarantee that that property will close. And that's when it starts getting a little crazy.
Yep.
Because usually a seller does not want to do that. And a buyer is uncertain of doing that because it's not his property. So the risk gets bigger when that happens. So you just need to be careful when that happens.
Okay.
Are you good with those answers?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so moving on, Lender limits on buyer's credits. So when there is a repair that needs to be done, a lot of times the seller will give a credit to the buyer. If you ever have a credit to the buyer, you need to call the lender to make sure that the lender will accept that credit and that it's not more than 3% of the purchase sales price. So number 5 says lender limits on buyer's credits. Any credit to the buyer from any source for closing or other cost that is agreed by parties contractual credit shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender. So if you're getting part of your down payment from a friend or a parent, anything like that, if you get closing costs paid by the seller, that's another reason to disclose to the lender. If you don't disclose to the lender and you get credits, it's considered fraud because the lender is got to know the whole picture of that borrower's finances. So it's real important that if you do get a credit that you at least check in with the lender to make sure that they can accept that. And a lot of times those credits for repairs will go to credit to the closing costs, either non-recurring or reoccurring closing costs. And that's how it would be written up in escrow on an amendment. So buyer stated financing. When you put your financing on page 1, what the situation is with the lender, the seller is relying on the buyer's representation of that financing. If that financing changes, you must disclose to the seller that it is changing. So if you go from, let's just say, an FHA loan where the property has to qualify and the buyer has to qualify, and all of a sudden that's not working out and you change to conventional financing and the terms have changed, you must disclose that to the seller. And a lot of people don't do that. That's where you get in trouble because the seller has accepted your offer based on the facts that you have put into the offer. And if those change, they could have taken a different offer that was either the same or better than yours. And now your situation has changed and maybe it's not as stable or as good as the other offers were. So just make sure that you disclose that. Sale of a buyer's property. If there's a property that needs to be sold prior to this contract going through, you must disclose that on a COP form. We are going to talk about that COP form tomorrow in the disclosures. So I'm going to continue to go further. Addenda and advisory. Number 5, you notice it says all kinds of things: backup offer addendum, septic well property addendum, short sale addendum. Anything that you check on this section, including the Century 21 Everest addendum, anything you check in this section must be attached to this contract. Each one of those addendums or each one of those CAR forms must be attached so that it goes to the lender and goes to the escrow company and to all parties in the transaction. So the Century 21 Everest addendum we are going to talk about tomorrow. And that states that we have a processing fee of $395. If your $395 processing fee is not included in the contract, then it's not a part of the contract. And then at the end of the end of escrow, you may find that you will be the one paying the $395 because you didn't include it in the contract so that everybody is aware of it.
Where do you think is the best place to include it in the contract?
Right where it is here. So 5B or 5A. So the addenda, if you notice on other, it says Century 21 Everest addendum.
Okay.
Okay, that's where you put that in and then you attach that form to the contract.
Okay, so not, okay, so the way I've been doing it is not the way I should do it then.
That way it's spelled out for everybody and it's included at the time that escrow is opened. Now escrow knows that it's there and everybody else knows that it's there. When a lender is giving the disclosures to the buyer, the lender has to disclose all fees. So that is a fee. It needs to be disclosed. If for some reason it's not at the end of the day, then they cannot charge the buyer for that fee.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So allocations of cost. This is a really important section of the purchase agreement. Inspections, reports, and certificates. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, the paragraph only determines who is to pay for the inspection, the test, the certification of service, or the report. It does not determine who is to pay for any work recommended or identified in the report. So if you notice, it says buyer and seller shall pay for natural hazard disclosure report, including environmental or other. Depending upon what type of property it is depending upon what type of NHD report you're going to order. The natural hazard disclosure report is ordered by a third-party company because the reports in that report, you do not want to interpret. You want a third party to disclose that to them. It passes on the liability and responsibility to the NHD company. So if you notice, it can either be the buyer or seller that pays for the report. Customarily, it is the seller who pays for the natural hazard disclosure report, and you have to specify the company. We have put in there My Seller's Choice. That is part of our one team here at Century 21 Everest, and we want to support that company. Number 2, it says buyer or seller shall pay for the following report. Well, what do you put in there? I always put my physical inspection so that the buyer knows that they're paying for that report. And that's the inspection report to inspect the property within the timeframes that we have.
Karen, can I just make a statement?
Sure.
I happen to disagree with that because anything that's in the purchase agreement now becomes privy to the lender.
Yes,
And I never want the lender to see my inspection report.
that's a good point.
So,
So
and I know the buyer's going to pay for it. So,
right,
but that's just my version.
okay. It can be done either way.
Yeah.
But yes. Number 3, you need to make sure that there's no inspection report that's required by a city that you may be writing the offer in. For instance, Ventura has a sewer lateral inspection that is required to be done prior to close of escrow, and somebody needs to pay for that. So if you're writing an offer in Ventura, you need to make sure that the seller has either done it already, of which you wouldn't have to put it in, or if it's not been done, it needs to be done prior to escrow. And so I always put that in there as well. And yes, Fred is correct. You don't have to put it in there because it becomes part of what goes to the escrow company and the title company. But it's very difficult to get someone to pay for something if it's not in writing and in the contract.
Also, for LA City, you make sure that you put the retrofit inspection in there. That's required.
Correct. So,
And also,
something that-
Karen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but with regards to inspections and reports within 7.123 or 7.2, it would be my recommendation for anyone writing an offer not to state or ask for a termite inspection report. Because as Fred stated, if once it's in the contract and the RPA, the lender is going to require to see that report.
So that is a very good point. And what you can do in this situation, if you know that report is something that the buyer wants, you can put it in a request for repair and have that be part of your inspection process.
Exactly.
Same with the sewer lateral. You can have that be part of your inspection. And if there's a problem with that report, then you can ask that in a request for repair. This is the controversy with that, is if you don't put it in the contract for the seller to pay, then the buyer is paying for that report. So
What is a sewer lateral report? We don't have that here.
it's only in Ventura. So
Yeah,
if you write an offer in Ventura, it will be required.
it's actually an inspection of the sewer system, make sure everything's fine. And that's out of Ventura only. We don't have that out here, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Just like in LA City, you have the retrofit inspection, which you want to make sure you do, otherwise it'll hold up closing also.
Right. And any of
So
the
what's
repairs for that have
what's
to
the
be
best-
done prior to close of escrow.
So how are you getting these things done if you're not making them part of this RPA?
You're going to put that on a request for repair. So my point is if you put it in the RPA and you request the seller to pay for the report, you've saved your buyer $350. That's how much it costs. If you don't want to put that in the report because you already know that something's up with that and that maybe it's not in good shape, then you would put it in the request for repair and the buyer would have to pay for that report.
Or you just prep your buyer about those fees and those reports before you put them into contract, and they just know that they have to pay for the report.
Correct.
Just part of their inspection period.
That's
Is that
what I
also,
do with my buyers.
It's in part of your investigation of the property.
quick question, is it also part of a mobile home? No, right? For
No,
sewer
not
lateral?
yet. So in Ventura, so this went in effect 2014. So 10 years, it will be required for condominiums and mobile home parks. It will eventually be required for everything,
But not right now, right?
not right now.
Thank you.
They gave them a 10-year grace period for condominiums because it's a complex and mobile homes because it's a park. But this is another thing to bring to your attention. If you're selling a condominium or a mobile home, it could be that those association fees will get adjusted because they don't have reserves for that report. And that report will be expensive because most condominium complexes have 2 to 5 different lateral lines to each one of the complexes, and all of them have to be inspected. So that's something to think about. We don't have to think about it for another 3 years, but it's coming.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Number B on page 2, government requirements and retrofit. It says buyer and seller shall pay for smoke alarm and carbon monoxide device installation and water heater bracing. Typically, the seller is required to do that. In this market, buyers are doing it. It's required for it to be by law. It's required by law that the smoke alarms and carbon and water heaters be braced. It must be done prior to close of escrow, and your appraiser is going to make sure of that because it is required by law. So you'll want to make sure that before the appraiser goes out to the property to do the appraisal, that those carbon and smokes are in and that the water heater is braced. So that's something that needs to happen before the end of the inspection contingency. And I always make sure that the listing agent knows that and that the seller is willing to do that. We're just a little over 10 o'clock. Should we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break and
Okay.
We'll see everybody here at 10:15.
Great, class already started. Get back in there.
So Chris, I don't know if we're going to get through this whole purchase contract. It takes a while to do that.
Yeah, I think so. We'll just get through as many pages as we can and we'll carry over tomorrow.
Okay, great.
I think we're down to 3 minutes, Karen, just so you know.
Chris, are you just hanging out here?
I am.
So I know we've gone over this probably 1,000 times, but one more time. If a client is putting a large down payment down, what are the downsides to removing the inspection contingency? What are the risks?
Well, I think removing any contingencies is a risk. So do you understand about the appraisal contingency, correct?
That's the contingency I'm thinking of removing to be competitive. I mean, it's so crazy out there right now.
Right, right.
That
That's
we're
something that
talking about removing it, but I want to know what the consequences could be. I mean, they're putting up a ton of money down.
right.
So
I think you have to take into.
it's likely it will appraise.
It's possible, but Andy, what I would first do is call the lender and have a conversation with them because of that large down payment. Because you don't want to you do not want to put your buyer in a position where heaven forbid, they need to come up with the difference should it appraise lower than the purchase price. So you need to have that conversation with the lender to see whether or not, that he can still qualify with a lower down payment in order to remove that appraisal contingency should extra money need to be submitted.
But it's like, so I can't imagine that it wouldn't appraise for this amount. And
No.
even if it did, it might be for like 20,000 less. but
Okay.
they're putting more than 100,000 down.
Right. So it's worth the time of take the 5 minutes and make that have that conversation with the lender. Because you do not want to assume anything in this market. So
Right.
just contact the lender and ask and go
Okay.
over the different scenarios.
Okay.
Just to make sure it'll give you peace of mind and, to know that you've done your due diligence in taking care of your client.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's see if we can get away with not doing it.
Andy.
No, I'll talk to the lender. I mean, I'll
Okay.
talk to him.
Okay.
I don't want to put my client in jeopardy.
Of course not. I mean, of course
It's not
you
worth
don't.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just get all of your facts. Don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Just obtain your facts first.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, the first step is make that phone call. Speak to the lender and find out. Go over the different scenarios. They're there to help you too.
No, I know. I know.
All right, everybody. Karen Campbell.
I'm here.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to put myself on mute. It's 10:15 and we're good to go.
Okay, great. All right. We've made it to page 3. I was just having a conversation with Chris saying, I don't know that we'll get through this entire contract today, but we're certainly going to give it our best shot. And what we don't cover, we will continue tomorrow. So we'll go from there. All right, page 3. At the top of every page, you'll notice there's the date. You want to put the date that you write the contract on that date. Number 2, it says buyer and seller shall pay for the cost of compliance when any other minimum mandatory government inspections and reports if required as a condition of the closing under any law. In our county, we do not have any mandatory government inspections. Fred, I think you guys have one in LA, right? Is the valves still?
Yeah, we have the retrofit inspection.
So it's just the retrofit inspection, which includes the valves.
Yeah, in the city of LA, correct.
Yes. So if you're writing a contract for a property in Los Angeles, you're going to say, yes, that buyer or seller, whoever's going to pay for that has to have that cost in mind.
Is retrofit, is that all it means? Just the valves?
No, what retrofit is they make sure you have an automatic gas shutoff valve. Make sure you have working carbon monoxide and smoke detectors where appropriate. Make sure you have safety glass where appropriate, like a slide-in door can't be a single pane glass. If it is, they'll put a sheet of paint, they'll put a sheet on it so it'll be shatter resistance. Those are basically inspections for a retrofit.
And that's mainly for earthquakes. So highly important everywhere, but it hasn't been mandated in every single city. But in LA County, they do have that.
When you say government, you don't mean the city either. Like Ventura, I mean, sometimes in Ventura we have the sewer lateral or other inspections required here. When you say government, it doesn't mean city.
Government does mean city.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to clarify.
Right. Next one, buyer and seller shall pay the cost of compliance with any minimum mandatory government retrofit standards required as a condition of the closing of escrow under law. So what is it called? Fred, what is that called for the faucets and all of that?
Oh, water conservation. That's actually a disclosure we have.
But it's coming.
It's coming where it's going to be a point of sale. Right now, it's just a question, do you have it or do you not have it?
Right. So we don't have any other minimum mandatory government retrofit standards right now, but it is coming and there will be a disclosure for that.
Okay. There's also going to be a disclosure for the home hardening. Right now, it's just a disclosure.
Right, it's just a recommendation.
Right. In a few years, there will actually be a point of sale requirement also.
Right.
So,
So those are a couple of those coming down the pike. It's been in the works for a long time. They are a disclosure, but they're not mandatory.
What was the last one he mentioned?
the home hardening, which is the new disclosure that's being used to see if your house is in a high or very high fire zone.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And then the one coming down the pike as well is for a high surf advisory. Because of global warming, the sea level is rising, and that will be coming as well. There's a lot of conversation about that right now. So those are things to be looking for, and we will bring those to your attention once they have happened, but they're in conversation right now. So number C, escrow and title. Buyer and seller shall pay escrow fee. Fee is usually split 50-50 because the escrow company is a neutral third party and both parties pay that escrow company. So I either write there each to pay their own cost or escrow fee to be split 50-50 between buyer and seller.
Karen, I like your first one better because
I do too. But I know
sometimes
write that.
the buyer escrow fee is more than the seller escrow fee or things like that. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was there a question, Fred?
paragraph 2 doesn't apply in paragraph 2I unless it's in Ventura Sewer Lateral. Are you going back to the Patty? Are we talking about the government inspections and retrofits?
Patty, you're probably muted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I say, you got to know, like Ventura has the sewer lateral, LA City has the retrofit. So you got to know what area or what city you're working on to see if there's any required inspections.
And just to do your homework on where the property is that you're writing the offer on. No, just the city of Ventura, Patty, for the sewer lateral in Ventura. So the reason that is,
I understand that, but what my question was, so paragraph 2I, double I and triple I really only, and we're speaking here of Ventura County. So 2I would only be checked if it was a sewer lateral in Ventura because Ventura is the only city, if you're asking the seller to pay for it, right? Is that correct? Because that is part of the government. Somebody had mentioned that earlier.
Right. Like I say, it depends on the location that
yeah.
you're doing it.
Right. Ventura County, specifically Ventura County. So Ventura requires a lateral scope.
The Ventura City does, yes.
Correct. So that paragraph I would be checked if you wanted to sell. I think that's the seller's responsibility, but I could be wrong.
it's the seller's responsibility, but in this market, it can be paid for by anyone.
Right. So paragraph 2I would apply to Ventura, the city of Ventura, if you're going to do it.
If you're writing an offer in Ventura, yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And the rest is not applicable in Ventura County if it's Camarillo or.
Yeah, it's not
Okay.
required.
Now, I know Ojai has something, but I'm not sure what they have. I think they also have some required
Well, in
inspections.
Ojai, they do require you to scope the sewer lateral, but the difference is the county employee has to be there at the same time that it's being done.
Yeah.
So it's a little more complicated up there.
Yeah, so you just have to realize, just have to know what areas you're working in to make sure you're covered.
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. So 1B, escrow holder shall be, and that's the name of the company. So All Valley Escrow would be the example. Number C, the party shall within 5 or however many days after receipt sign and return escrow holders general provisions. So you have five calendar days to review escrow instructions after you receive them, and then you need to get those right back to escrow, and that's what that is. It's in the contract. Number 2, buyer and seller shall pay for owner's title policy specified in paragraph 13E. It states who's going to pay for the title insurance policy. Typically, the seller pays for that. In this market, either can pay for that. And then B, owner's title policy to be issued by the title company, whether it be Fidelity or consumers or lawyers, whichever, you need to write the title company name in there.
How much normally would that be?
It's based on the sales price.
I'm sorry?
It's based on the sales price.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So you would call your title company if your buyer was concerned about that or your seller was concerned about that. You would be calling your title company, your rep, and finding out how much the title policy would be based on the sales price.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Buyer shall pay for any title insurance policy insuring the buyer's lender. So that's part of the closing costs for the lender for the buyer. The lender wants to make sure that there's clear title to the property. So they are going to require the buyer to pay for a policy to ensure the lender that there's clear title. And that is part of the lender's closing costs. So you don't have to worry about that. That will be part of the buyer's lender's closing costs. So D, other costs. Buyer and seller shall pay for county transfer tax or fee. We have a county transfer tax in the county of Ventura. Fred, in LA, do you have county and city or just county?
LA has a county. The city of LA has a city.
Okay, so
Different cities have, like Santa Clarita does not have a city tax.
Ventura and Camarillo do not either.
Yeah.
So number 1, you would typically the seller pays for the county transfer tax. It can be by either party. So if the buyer is going to pay some of the seller's closing costs, which we're starting to see, then that could be one of those things. The county transfer tax is $1.10 per thousand, and it's based on the sales price in Ventura County. Number 2, buyer and seller shall pay city transfer tax. Again, if you are writing an offer in a city where there is a city transfer tax, you need to ask the escrow officer if that city has a transfer tax or not. A lot of times people will put either buyer or seller to pay for that and then say if applicable if you don't know. And then it will apply or it won't apply. Number 3, buyer and seller shall pay for homeowners association HOA transfer fee. I'm going to go to number 4 as well, and then we're going to talk about that. Seller shall pay for HOA fees for preparing the documents required to be delivered by Civil Code 4525. And then number 5 is the seller shall pay for HOA preparing all documents other than those required by Civil Code, and buyer to pay for HOA certification fee. When there's an HOA, and it could be that it is for a single family home, it could be a PUD, it can be a condo, any of those that requires HOAs, you're going to have documentation from that HOA, and you're going to have fees that are go along with those. So the transfer fee typically can be anywhere from $100 to $500. You need to check with the association to find out what that fee is. And either buyer or seller can pay for it. Typically, it's paid for by the seller because the seller wants to transfer it into your name or into the buyer's name. The HOA fee for the documents, I've seen them as high as $1,000. So again, you need to check with the HOA to make sure that those documents, you know what the fees are for those. And then an HOA certification fee. Not all associations have that, but some do, and you'll need to know what those are. Number 7, buyer and seller to pay for any private transfer fee. So a private transfer fee is a fee that a builder puts on the title so that every time it's transferred, the builder gets a fee for that. And a lot of times the seller pays for that fee. They know it going in when they buy a property, especially if it's brand new. And in this market, either buyer or seller can pay that transfer fee. The way you find that out is by calling your title company to find out if there's a private transfer fee on that. And then you've got a couple options for 8 and 9, buyer and seller to pay for. It can be anything, whatever is required by that particular property. Number 10, buyer and seller to pay for the cost not to exceed a dollar amount for a standard or upgraded 1-year home warranty plan issued by, and then I put First American or Old Republic only because Century 21 Everest has Crest insurance for their E&O insurance, and the home warranty has a Crest plan that will help pay for some of the fees for the seller if they get into litigation, and for the buyer for the agent if we need to pay our deductible. And you can call First American or Old Republic and they will give you all the details to that. They also have a certification that they can give you so that you can show that to your buyer or seller. And then you always want to check the other box and say a Crest plan with buyer to select options or upgrades. Or your buyer can waive the purchase of a home warranty protection plan and get it after the close of escrow and pay for it themselves. In this market, we're seeing a lot of that, buyer waiving the home warranty plan. Number 8, items included in and excluded from the sale. So note to buyer and seller, items listed included or excluded in the MLS, flyers or marketing materials are not included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specifically stated in 8B or C. So a lot of times people will put in the MLS that the refrigerator is included, and then the seller changes their mind and says, I think I'm taking that with me. Even though it's in MLS, that does not mean that the refrigerator is going to be included in the sale. It simply means that you need to ask for it in the contract if you want that refrigerator, as an example. So B is items included in the sale except otherwise specified or disclosed. Number 1 says all existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property. Number 2 says existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, solar power systems, built-in appliances, window doors, screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers or conditioners, pool or spa equipment, garage doors, openers and remotes, mailbox, in-ground landscaping, trees, shrubs, water features, fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, security systems, alarm systems, and the following if checked. If there's a freestanding stove in the property, you need to check the box for all stoves to be included in the sale. Same with a refrigerator. A refrigerator is considered personal property and is not included in the sale in most cases. And if you want that to be included in the sale, you need to check the box for all refrigerators to be included in the sale. And same with washer and dryers. Washer and dryers are considered personal property as well, and they typically are not included in the sale. Same with water softeners. Water softeners are included in the sale only if it's in the contract. Most of the time they are rented or they are purchased and they are considered personal property. The following additional items to be included in the sale, you need to spell it out. If it's a shed, if it's a water fountain, if it's above ground pool, any of those things that are not attached that you want to be included in the sale must be written in the contract. Number 4, existing integrated phone and home automated systems, including necessary components such as intranet and internet connection, wire or hard devices, controlled units, mobile devices, electronics or computers, applicable software, permissions, passwords, codes, and access information. All of those are considered to be part of the sale. And in today's market, you're seeing a lot of the rings, you're seeing a lot of smart devices. If you are concerned that something's not included, you need to write it in on number 3 so that it's clear that you want those items. Number 6, seller represents that all items included in the purchase price, unless otherwise specified, are owned by the seller and shall be transferred free and clear of liens and encumbrances, except the items and systems identified in 8B. So if you see, when you walk up to the property, if you see a solar system on the roof, you're going to make sure that you write that into the contract and that it's free and clear. A lot of times solar systems have loans attached to them that could be attached to the property in the property taxes, or they could have a PACE loan, which is a loan that was given to them at 0 cost and not have to pay any payments for 3 years. And they may still owe the full amount of the cost of the solar system, and it has to be transferred into the buyer's name in order for the property to sell. Sometimes we know that up front, and sometimes we find that during the course of escrow. A lot of times those are posted on your title report. So you'll want to do your homework prior to if you see solar system on top of the roof. Same with artificial turf, or if you see new windows. You want to make sure that those windows are paid for and that they were installed and they're free and clear. Items excluded from the sale. Unless otherwise specified, the following items are excluded from the sale: audio and visual components such as flat screen TVs, speakers, or other items. Even if the bracket or the mechanism attached to the component or the item is attached to the property, furniture and other items secured to the property for earthquake purposes, they are always excluded from the sale because they are not considered a fixture. If you see something that your buyer wants, you can write it into the contract and it can be part of the negotiations. Brackets on the walls, floors, ceilings for such components, furniture, or items shall remain with the property or will be removed, and the holes and other damages to be repaired but not painted prior to close of escrow. Closing in possession. Buyer intends to occupy the property as a buyer property residence or does not intend to. So if you're buying it as a rental property, then you need to check the box because the lender needs to see that the buyer is intending to occupy the property. If you do not check the box and you're buying a rental property and you're getting a loan for a rental property, the lender's going to want to see that box checked. 9B, seller occupied or vacant property possession shall be delivered to the buyer at 6 p.m. or you need to specify when at close of escrow will the seller have the property vacant. Very important. Sorry, my throat's going crazy. Okay, page 4. Seller remaining in possession after close of escrow. You need to make sure that you fill out an SIP form. We will be going over that form tomorrow, I believe. Yes. to make sure that the seller continue to occupy of less than 30 days. There's specifics to that SIP form. Tenant occupied property shall be vacant at least 5 days prior to close unless otherwise agreed in writing. So
Sorry.
prior to your verification of condition of property, your walkthrough, you want to make sure that the tenant has gone and that all of their possessions have gone as well.
We have one question, Karen.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, going back to solar panels and windows, how do we know if they're free and clear? Most likely there will be a lien on the property, which you will get from title when you look at your title report, but also ask the questions if, you know, if you do see solar panels like Karen said, or if you do see a new AC or a new window, just ask the question, you know, is that lease? Is that, you know, on a hero program? How was it done?
PACE program.
Yeah.
So usually your title company will be able to determine whether it's free and clear or not. Typically the seller will tell you, but a lot of times they don't, they forget. So a lot of times the deal is with solar panels that when they get installed, the company will say, you don't have to pay anything. It'll just go on your property tax, but it won't go on your property tax for 3 years. I had one where they had it for 2 years. They decided to sell their house and they forgot completely that they owed any money on it. Well, it was a $40,000 solar system. The buyer didn't qualify for $40,000 more, and the seller forgot to say something. So guess what? That did not close. So you need to make sure you're doing your homework on that. Did that answer your question, Kelly?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So E, at close of escrow, seller assigns a buyer to an assignable warranty rights for items included in the sale. Anytime you have a water softener or anything like that, you need to make sure that the company will transfer that contract from one person to another. And that needs to be done in escrow. I actually am going to have to stop at this point because my throat is being really, really, really bad. So Fred, maybe you can take over for just a little bit and get us through the next page.
Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem. What page are we at, Chris?
We are on page 4, number E at the top.
Okay. Okay, so basically he is just saying that anything that the seller has that there's a warranty on that's convertible, you know, make sure the buyer gets all copies of the warranties. And at the close of escrow, if there's any alarm systems that are still going to be going or anything like that, you know, things I've seen right now is key safes, you know, for the door. Make sure that you have the codes for the keys to get in and everything is working. Statutory, okay, so basically lead paint is for anything past 1972. Prior to that, you need to have a lead-based paint disclosure, basically saying, you know, we know there might have been lead paint. Have we done any modifications? Have we done it correctly? It's just a question that the sellers need to answer to see if everything's been done. Okay. Sorry, no, what is that? Yeah. Okay, so that's all lead paint. The NHD, natural hazard disclosure. Okay. Like Karen said, we require the seller or the buyer to buy what's called an NHD report. that will have all these disclosures for them. We also have a form that has links to all the booklets that are required. The earthquake booklet, the NHD booklets. So make sure your seller or make sure your buyer has this form so they can click on all the links if they want to download it. We used to give out paper versions a long time ago. We've gone away from paper, and now everything is electronic. Withholding taxes. Okay, so this is, it's what's called a FERPTR. This is filled out basically at escrow. We don't get involved in it. We don't want to know the social security number of the buyer or the seller. So escrow handles all this, and this is just stating that escrow will be what's called a third party for this and handle the information. Megan's Law database. I tell my agents, never look at Megan's Law database, because once you know it, you have to disclose it. But again, this is just telling the buyer where they can go look to see if there's any issues with the neighborhood they're buying. We never want to be the one to tell them. We want to know about it. But if you do know about it, unfortunately, you have to disclose it. Gas and hazardous liquid transmission pipelines. This came about, of course, what happened in Oakland a few years ago. That is now part of the NHD report, and that's why it's so important to have the NHD report, because it would disclose all these issues for them. Condominium development disclosures. This is the CC&Rs or anything else for your condominium. Make sure the buyer reads them. If the buyer wants to do a rental, they need to make sure the condominium is going to allow it. If they want to park their big truck that they use for work, make sure the condominium, HOA is going to allow that. So anything that the buyer is telling you, make sure they read the documents to make sure it's allowable and disclosed. Next. Oh. There we go. Okay, condition of property. Basically, it says the property is sold as is. As is really means not a lot. I mean, you're still going to do your inspections. You're still, depending on what you find, you're still going to ask, do a request for repairs. If, the seller agrees or disagrees, that's a whole nother decision. But state, I've seen so many people put in the MLS, property is as is. The minute I see that, I go, okay, there's some problems with this property. So just let your seller know it's already in the contract, it's as is. But again, that's not going to stop people from doing their, required inspections. Even if it is as is, again, the seller is required to disclose any known material facts or defects they know about the property in the TDS or SBQ. Just because it as is doesn't mean the seller doesn't have to say anything. Buyer's investigations of property and matters affecting property. Yes. Okay. So again, we're talking about during your inspection period, do all the inspections you want. The seller can't say, no, sorry, you can't do that inspection. You have the right to do any inspection you want as long as you're paying for it. And then once you have all the information, you could do a request for repairs, and that'll be talked about later on. But again, the seller doesn't even have to acknowledge or do anything for the request for repairs. But you need to make your investigations and make sure your buyer is comfortable with what they are purchasing. And B says, the seller has to make the property available for all the inspections within reason. I mean, we can't do any invasive inspections. We can't, poke holes in the wall to make sure things are, not behind there. We can't lift up carpet to see what the slab looks like. It has to be something that's visual or measurable. Again, make sure, this is more on the seller side too, that all the utilities are on. The gas, the electricity, the water, not just for your inspections, but also the appraiser is going to make sure that things work. If any of these are not on, sometimes there's a cost involved to get it back turned on, and then also you have to do a reinspection or a reappraisal. So it's make sure that the seller just leaves everything working, and they will turn it over when at the close of escrow, it will go into the new buyer's names and take care of that. Yeah, buyer name, sale picture, entry in property. Okay, again, it's just stating that, you know, the buyers are, you know, you're taking a risk when you go into someone's buyer. The seller's holding people harmless. If, you know, you inspect the falls, make sure your inspector has liability insurance and coverage, all that. This is the other reason why we don't do repairs before you own the house, because if the buyer does a repair and doesn't close escrow, you've just improved someone else's house. Title invested. This is the question we get a lot of. How should I hold title? We are not allowed to, and even escrow is not allowed to advise anyone how to hold title. We have a sheet that we hand out. Escrow has a sheet. They should be talking to their tax attorney and their lawyers, because different ways to hold title has different implications in terms of taxes and also liability in terms of legal actions. If someone dies, who has it passed, things like that. So we always refer, please consult a CPA or your attorney. And they say, oh, well, you know, what's the most common way to hold title? Or how do you hold title? Again, we cannot provide that information. Everyone has to find out and do the due diligence on how they should do it. Time periods and removal of contingencies. So seller has 7 days after acceptance, and acceptance is when the last counter offer is signed and you have an executed contract, not when escrow opens up, you know, nothing like that. It's a actual date that everyone agrees to, that it's the last signature on the executed counters, and it's day 0. The next day is day 1. So 7 days from that, the seller has to deliver all these reports to you, because you then have 10 days to review these reports, or 17 days to review these reports. If the seller doesn't give it to you in 7 days, we need to have a conversation. We need to use what's called a notice to perform, which will be discussed later, because you're not shortening your time frame. So if they have 7 days and you have 17, now you only have 10 days to look at all the documents and make sure everything is correct. Buyer has 17 days to do their inspection. Contingency, okay. So make sure that, okay, so here is an issue, and maybe they'll talk about it when you have the request for repairs. This is, the contingency is inspections. The contingency is not agreed to request for repairs and what's going to happen. So a lot of times you may have to remove your contingency not knowing what the outcome of your request for repairs is going to be. So that's just something that definitely needs to be discussed, because it is, and I have this, you know, conversation all the time. Oh my God, you know, we did this request for repairs. How can I remove my contingency if we don't know what's going to happen? Again, the contingency is inspections. It's not the resolve the outcomes of the request for repairs. I will never check C. That's just my advice. That says you're removing all your contingencies before anything. You'll still have the right to do your inspections, but doesn't make a difference what happens because you removed your contingency. So if you don't like something that you found in your inspection and you cancel, your EMD money is up for grabs. Seller's right to cancel. The seller has a right to cancel if at the time specified in the agreement, the buyer does not deliver to seller. So again, if you don't remove your contingencies in time, the seller can give you what's called a notice to perform. They have 2 days after that, and then they can cancel if you don't agree or extend your contingencies. You can extend your contingencies with a modification of terms or an extension of time, and that will extend your contingencies. If I need 20 days to do my inspections or whatever, make sure you use forms. Everything is run by the contract. Okay? Seller, notice to buyer. Okay, so here's a notice to buyer to perform. The minimum is 2 days. We cannot lower that. If you want to extend it and say, hey, you know, I need 3 days to respond, you can add it here, but they can never go less than 2 days. And again, if you remove your contingencies, these are all passive removals. That means you have to do something for it to happen. It's not going to happen automatically. When we were doing short sales, the banks would say after 14 days, the contingencies are removed. You didn't have to do anything. So again, and I know there's a lot of different contracts out now with like Zillow and other things. So just make sure you look at the contract and see what's included. Okay, back again. Okay, close of escrow. So again, demand to close. If you have a close of escrow date and either the seller or the buyer needs more time, make sure you fill out the correct form, extension of time, because you don't want, once you miss the close of escrow, your contract's dead. You know, they can give you a demand to close. If you can't close, then they can cancel the contract and move on. You don't want to get to that. If you know you're not going to be able to make the close of escrow date, be upfront with the other side and work out a date that's going to be, you know, for everyone. Don't surprise the other person and go, oh, sorry, you know, we can't close tomorrow. We need another week. It's just, you know, good relationship. Upfront, the minute you know something's happening, let's work it out and move forward. Okay, effective cancellation of deposits. Okay, so this is the most controversial part of life. It takes one person. You can cancel a contract unilaterally. The buyer can cancel, the seller can cancel, contract's dead. To cancel escrow and get your money back requires both signatures, seller and buyer. Unfortunately, sometimes you cancel, the seller's upset, they say, I'm not signing, your money is held up until you either come to a resolution or you take some legal action. Even though you may have 100% right to get all your money back because you didn't remove any contingencies, you were perfect, doesn't make a difference. If both people don't agree, your money is tied up until something is determined, either through a court of law or a negotiation with the clients. Next page. Any questions so far? I know I'm going pretty fast. All right. Final verification of property. So the VP is done typically 5 days before the close of escrow. The VP is not a time to find out new issues. It's not a time to do new inspections. The VP is basically saying two things. One, is the property in the same condition as when I saw it? You know, is the lawn the same color green when I saw it? You know, did they shut off the water and now the lawn's dead? Are there any holes in the wall that I didn't see, you know, that weren't there before? One of the biggest issues with VP is the buyer says, well, I don't want to do the VP until the seller moves out. That's not a reality. The seller's probably not going to move out until the last day close of escrow. So you're going to have to do the VP prior to that. If you find issues once the seller moves out, there's other recourses for that. But at this point, the VP is just one, same condition. Two, any repairs I requested, are they done and is it working? You know, not, oh, now I've noticed there's a new drip or now I notice there's a new stain. That was during your inspections. This is basically verification of the property. You ready, Karen?
I am. Sorry about that. I just had to drink a lot of water.
That's okay, no problem.
So repairs, just on that final inspection, I want to add just one more thing too, is when you're doing your final inspection and you have not moved everything so that if it's not completely vacant, and there's like, for instance, I just had a situation with an agent that they didn't move a couch. The couch was for sale. They didn't move the couch. when they finally sold the couch and the property was getting ready to close, there was a gigantic stain on the carpet. Of course, the new buyers want that stain removed, and then it became a problem because the seller didn't want to remove that stain. So you just want to make sure that you look under things, you look behind things. If it's not completely vacant, I had another situation where there was a refrigerator in the garage and they didn't move that refrigerator. When they finally moved it out, it was completely mold. And so you just want to make sure that you're doing your final walkthrough and making sure that things are vacant, but if they're not, you need to move them to make sure that there's nothing underneath that couch or refrigerator or freezer, whatever. So number 16, repairs. Repairs shall be completed prior to final verification condition of property in writing. So if you've requested repairs from your inspection and they were agreed to on RRRs in the course of the inspection periods, then you want to make sure that those repairs were done. You can do one of two things. You can hire your inspector back to see if they were done correctly, or you can ask for receipts from the seller to make sure that it was done by a licensed contractor and make sure that those repairs are done to working satisfactory condition before you sign off on those. Prorations of property tax and other items. In escrow, everything will be prorated to the day of close of escrow. So everything that was a bill will be prorated to the close of escrow, and then anything from the close of escrow forward is the responsibility of the buyer. Broker's compensation. Seller or buyer or both as applicable agreed to pay compensation to the broker as specified in a separate written agreement between broker and the seller or buyer. That is either your listing agreement or it is your buyer-broker agreement, if there's anything besides what the listing contract is and the offer of compensation in the multiple listing service. The scope of duty, it basically states what the buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that the broker is doing their due diligence for condition of property, inspections, all of those kinds of things, that they're getting their information, representation from the multiple listing service. Representation of capacity. If one or more parties is signing this agreement and representation capacity and not for himself or herself as an individual, then the party shall indicate in paragraphs 31 and 32 a representative capacity signature disclosure. What that simply means is if you're not representing yourself and you're working under either a trust or working under power of attorney or anything that you're representing somebody else, you need to make sure that you are filling out that RCSD form so that they have verification of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing.
Karen, do you want to hold joint escrow for tomorrow?
Oh, sure. I didn't realize that we were past. So yes, we will, we'll stop now and we'll do number 20, joint escrow instructions, and do that starting tomorrow, and we'll finish up the contract and the rest of those disclosures. You're probably a little tired of all of us talking by this time. Anyway, so thank you for being with us today. I hope you learned a couple things that you didn't know, and we'll continue these classes tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris, for being the back end operator. We appreciate you.
Thanks. All right, see you tomorrow.
All right, see you guys tomorrow.